And it's popped up that the meeting is being recorded. So just everyone be aware of that as they say or don't say what they want to say or don't say. Get started. I just have a few little remarks to start, and then I'm going to pass it over to our speakers. But if people come in a few minutes late and miss what I say, it won't really matter. So I think we'll just start going. So I wanted to welcome everyone to our LGBTQ personal stories presentation. This is the fourth in our speaker series, and we've already done a presentation on disability. We had one on race over the summer. We did Indigenous issues and I guess queer issues last time, and now we're talking about LGBTQ personal stories. If you've missed a previous one, I know I recognize a lot of folks here, and I think a lot of you guys are the ones that have been to all of them, but if you have missed one, we are recording them, and we are able to view them after the fact. And just to, as I mentioned earlier, be aware, these are being recorded. So if there's something that you would say differently, if it wasn't being recorded, just be aware that this is being recorded for future use. And I just want to thank everyone for coming tonight again, just because, you know, it really is important to us as the Affirming Committee to have such a great commitment from the congregation to our presentations. It's so weird in these COVID times to be doing this work, but it's been really nice to engage with the congregation this way, and it really really helps us on the committee to connect with you on these issues and educate all of ourselves. As always, with our presentations, these are just a starting point for discussion, and they're a time for all of us to learn, and no one's expecting anyone to know all the right words to say or you know, have all the knowledge at the beginning of these talks. So feel free to ask questions. They will be, I think if you type them up during the presentation, I'll try to ask them at the end, or we can open the floor a little bit and people can ask questions themselves. But I do encourage you to think about things. If there's something that's just tweaking in your brain a little bit, to ask a question. And then also, just after this is over, remember that we will try to have more times to talk about these issues, because it's an ongoing process. Also, I just want to thank our presenters today, because we are lucky to have in tonight's presentation folks from our congregation, which I think is really important. It's a really nice way to connect with an issue where we're connecting with people who actually are a part of our congregation, who are have these personal stories. So thanks, you guys. All right, so the first speaker, we're gonna have two speakers. First, we're having Sarah Dawn Adams, and I'm gonna introduce her. She's gonna speak for a little bit, then we're gonna have a couple questions, and then we're gonna have Jen and Brenda speak. So in terms of Sarah Dawn, in her day job, she is a knit and crochet designer and instructor. When it comes to matters of faith, her experiences as a queer disabled Christian has shaped her perspective on social justice and inclusion. She is involved in disability rights work, having done ADOA compliance, as well as serving on the advisory committee for the accessible transit for 3 years. She's also presented on the idea that one can be both queer and Christian, something I find very interesting myself, with several LGBTQA small groups, as well as speaking about this in various online venues. Her own faith experiences have grown from her own experience as both exclusion and inclusion, and she's thrilled and humbled to have the chance to speak to us about her journey. To everyone here. Okay, so I'll go on mute and welcome Sarah.
Hi, everybody. You know, if you can't, technical stuff, the joys of Zoom. A few really brief housekeeping of my own. Number one, I talk fast. So if you need me to slow down, I won't be offended. Just tell me. And number two is sort of on the same note. I I storytell in neurodivergent mode, which means that I can make jumps and people can go, how'd you get there? So if you ever want me to double back, explain something, hang on, what does that mean? Just let me know. I won't be offended. I am here to talk and to teach, not to leave you folks in a state of confusion. So I'm going to start with when I first came to Runnymede and why this is so important. So the first thing you have to understand about me is I identify myself as a queer Christian. It would be more accurate to say at this point that I identify myself as an asexual Christian, which is the A in the LGBTQA community, and one that doesn't actually get a lot of talk. And I'll come back to that comment later. But the reason I say queer is because it is an ongoing journey for a lot of folks, not just myself, as they sort of feel out where they fit in the LGBTQA2S community. Because very often you'll kind of think you start in one box and you move to another and you move to another, and that's where I was. And I'll come back to that concept in a bit, but I wanted to kind of just address that very briefly. So when I came to Runnymede, it was, I think, 2014, and I had been invited to my cousin's baptism. My experience with the church prior to that, I'd had some good experiences. I'd also had some horrific ones. I had seen churches that believed that I should be dead. I had seen churches advocate for the kicking people like me out of their homes, for kicking, I had seen churches mourn, like take somebody when someone like me as a neurodivergent person was murdered, churches celebrated. And I left in a frantic, no, I'm getting out of here. And that was my, and so I actually had not been to a church, was very hostile towards both disabled and queer people. I don't believe that church knew that I was queer, like in any form, and I could not stay. So when I came to Runnymede, I was terrified because I had no idea. I knew the vague concept of an affirming church, but I didn't really know how to look for it. I didn't know how to know. I had no idea if this church was going to be okay. I had no idea if I would walk in and hear the hellfire and brimstone, the gays are going to hell sermons that I had heard before, where people like me were told that we were not only just sinners, but utter abominations worthy of death. And so I stood on that front step for a good 20 minutes. I was late. I crept into the back seat of the pew, like completely just, I'm here hiding in my coat. I felt as good it was of getting re-involved with the church community. Affirming is so important because there are churches out there who are amazing about like all social justice work, not just like queer spaces, but racism and sexism and homophobia and ableism and all the things. But the perception of the church, especially from those who have been injured by it, is still nope, 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 and nope. We're not touching that with a 30-foot pole. I speak to so many queer folks who are no longer Christian or who've lost their faith because of the attitude of the church community. And I think that's utterly, it makes me want to weep. Like it makes me ultimately want to weep and go on a angry, like shaking people and going, what are you doing? These are our siblings. And so this is why the affirming process is so important, because nobody should be standing at the door of a church wondering if it is safe for them to enter. And that's like, and this is just me, like as somebody who is now part of this church, I know is a lot better. I had no knowledge. I had no idea if this was going to be safe. I mean, now the internet is a bit more advanced, and we have things like sorry, I'm a handheld. I'm just adjusting myself. We have things like the affirming church notifications, and now I also know a little more, so I would know to look for affirming churches. I didn't know that back then. So that's the first thing, and this is why the affirming is so important, because those are the symbols we're going to be able to show people that say, hey, this is a church that actually does care about this stuff. This is a church that is working to inclusion. We may not get it right. It's always a learning curve. But to be able to be on the affirming, it's first off, it's kind of a third-party vetting, if you will. But it's also just, yeah, this is a church that is looking at this stuff and saying that these people are our siblings and they are valid and worthy and they don't deserve to be kicked out of their homes or attacked and have acts of violence committed against them. They deserve to have the same rights and abilities and inclusion, full inclusion in this community as everybody else does. An affirming community is one that doesn't have to debate whether women can become leadership roles in the church. And I could keep going, but I like, and when you know that a church is affirming, you know they're looking at this stuff and they're trying to tackle it. And it also is a sign that that's a church that even if they don't get it right, they're going to keep looking at it and keep tackling it. Because, Christ's teachings are for the least of us, are for those who are marginalized and excluded and left behind and shunned. And me, what affirming is all about. Nobody should be afraid at the doors of a church. And that's the biggest reason I actually came to this committee, was because I remember that feeling and it sucked and I don't want anyone to have to face it again. So that's where I'm going to start this. And now I'm going to double back because people go like, well, how did you get there? So I started as a very little child. I was baptized in a church in Scarborough, but I'm a 3-month preemie. My medical file is a file cabinet. I have stacks and stacks and stuff on microfilm because that was the only way at the time they could store my ridiculous medical files. I was a sick kid's kid all my life. Okay, like until I, until I basically aged out. And that has been the first major shaper. Actually, no, let me back up. The first major shaper of my faith was my mother. She churched. She was the church lady. She did all the church things. I don't know where she found the energy, because on top of all of that, she actually lived with a pretty severe disability herself. But this was the woman who did, the church baking, bake sales, and she sang in the choir, and she did solos, and she did this and that, and like I look back on that and go, how? But here's the thing. When I was a young child, I went to church with my parents, and I actually enjoyed it. I was a kid. We learned about Noah's Ark and Sunday school and Adam and Eve and all that. And it was pretty simplistic, as you'd expect, like Sunday school for 5-year-old kids. We didn't get into matters of theology. But I still remember, even then, like the rest of the Sunday school would go on trips, and I'd go to the church library or sit in at the adult service. And 5-year-old me didn't know this wasn't supposed to happen. I'll come back to that point. When I was 7, my mother passed away. It was complications due to her disability, and it was somewhat unexpected. And 7-year-old me, with a very simplistic understanding of God, said, well, God, if you can raise Jesus, you can raise my mom. Needless to say, this didn't happen, and 7-year-old me decided that I didn't need God. Unfortunately, 7-year-old me wasn't really equipped to contend with kind of the real world, as it were. When my mother passed away, my father, despite his best efforts, tried. But the family situation kind of disintegrated. And when my father remarried, it kind of disintegrated even more. There was a lot of, I didn't see at the time, but there was a lot of stigma around being a single male parent. And I spent a lot of time at my friends' houses or at my grandparents' place or my aunt's place. And when my father tried, he was, by necessity of being a single working parent, had to be kind of distant. And that was reasonably okay. But the person I spent the most time with, her and her family were very, very fundamentalist Christians. I don't know the denomination, and I do not agree with some of the theology. Even back then, I kind of found some question marks. But being reintroduced to a family that did things like said grace at every meal and did Bible studies every night was my first sort of look at, oh, hang on, this is a thing. So the thing is, I'm going to kind of jump around a little bit here. My family life continued to kind of fall apart when my father remarried. I'm going to gloss over most of that, except to say that I actually eventually ended up running away from home. Now, one of the things I quickly learned in this newfound family life was that that I was now the kind of family shame. I was the disabled child. I was the person that the rest of the family. I was legit at points kind of told to go in the back room when company came because I was an embarrassment to the new extended family. Of course, this did not go well. And in that isolation, in these questions that started raising with me, I ended up actually turning back to God. With the situation of not a lot of friends in school because I was, and I'm going to use a slur here, the class retard. And I was the class retard. I was not only bullied, but actually physically assaulted several times in the school. When I had my arm broken, the student who did that was not even suspected. But a permit, not a lot of marks. So what I found out that there was no possible socially acceptable way for anybody to complain about their kids spending time at church. So I found the church in walking distance and I went and I signed up for everything because it meant that I didn't have to be home, and I even got special dispensation to get out of school on certain holidays, like Ash Wednesday. This was great. Well, and that went about as well as one could expect, and actually, it was good. That church community, well, I wouldn't call them progressive, they were actually really supportive, and I think some of them even clued in there was some family unhappiness happening, because I started making connections and staying over with members of the congregation and connecting with people in that sense. Now, none of this had ever once perceived to me the concept of homosexuality or queerness in any fashion, in any way. That was never something I'd ever been exposed to until about grade 7, when I was in my little corner of the schoolyard reading a book at recess and trying not to get bullied. And one of the older students walks up to me and says, "I like you." And I'm sort of thinking, what? Uh-uh. And I think, I don't even remember what I said to her. I just like, what? And she basically tried to explain to me that she had seen me in the schoolyard and had a crush on me. I understand that now. Back then, I had no idea what she was talking about. And she finally blurted out that, girls can like girls, right? And I stared at her. I was like, that, but she then told me that she wanted to meet me behind the bleachers. I didn't go. I don't know whether her intent was genuine. I have no idea what her intent was, whether she intended any malice towards me, but those were usually threats of malice and violence. So I didn't go meet her. Like I said, I have no idea if her offer was genuine, if she really was attracted to me. I don't know. I sometimes vaguely regret not ever finding her again, but that was my first exposure to the idea that it wasn't just, man and woman. And luckily, for the credit of my father, that was not a mind-blowing concept. So, me being the somewhat socially oblivious person that I am, asked my church youth leader. Now, to be fair, again, this was not a church where I got the speech about, abominations and you're all going to hell. But they definitely were concerned, and I got a seminar from the youth group, we all did, about the evils of lust. And again, oddly enough, it was actually kind of interestingly informative because it did do the whole, you don't do sex before marriage, and you don't, it didn't explicitly say like, oh my gosh, homosexuality is a sin. But they did basically do the whole no sex before marriage. There was a focus on like now what we know is like how the idea of women's sexual purity. But they also talked about stuff like advertising and the concept of advertising and sex and how they got in a little bit of psychology of that. And yeah, being it aimed at teenage. Here's sort of quirk number 2. Now, this was impossible for me to figure out for the longest time because again, I'll use the slur, the class retard. I was pulled out of sex ed. By the way, folks, this is 2002 and they were still pulling disabled children out of the sex ed classes in public school. Yeah. We're not talking like that long ago here. So I had no real idea about this stuff, and thank goodness one of my aunts is a nurse, and I at least got the functional side of that from her. But so I sat there thinking, I don't get it. Like, I don't get it. What is this whole, like, why are people so obsessed with sex? I understood the intellectual side of like why they talked about sex sells, but I didn't see the attraction. And in high school, when all the other girls were like, "Oh my gosh, that guy's so cute," huh, really? No, I learned to smile and not,
You're
because
cutting.
again, I was freaking anymore. Reasonably okay. Oh, am I cutting in and out?
Yeah, a
How's
little
that?
bit. So I don't know if there's anything you can do on
Okay,
your, but just, and
hang
then
on. Let me
also
adjust.
and I just want to say it's so like there's so much that you're talking about that's like so amazing and interesting. But also we just
Oh
want to
yeah,
be
I'm trying to.
timing. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm wrapping up pretty quick. So I'm working to the end. Where was I? Okay, so as I mentioned, I ran away from home to go to university because I was, and again I will quote, I was, and I quote, too stupid to go to university. I had already been accepted. Yeah. There was a lot of shenanigans, and I had to actually tap in. Actually, no, I'm gonna have to actually tell this one. When I was supposed to go to university, my father had originally agreed to drive me out to residence. I was moving away from this family. Um, he couldn't due to circumstances beyond his control. And I was stranded for a university I already paid with the only other person capable of driving flat out refusing to do so. So I was on the floor. Like, what do I do? I've already paid for my residence. No one else thinks I can go. So I actually ended up, that was pretty much the night I ran away. I'm glossing over the details. I ended up at a teacher's place. And this is where I say, like, God happens, because somehow my aunt knew to call that teacher. I don't know how she had that teacher's phone number. She doesn't know how she had the teacher's phone number. It was just in her address book, and somehow she knew to call there about what happened to my father, and she could drive me to university. I don't know how she remember who. Yeah. This is where I say God happens. So I go down to University of Maryland, who drives me down there, helps me get set up. This woman has functionally become my mother in a lot of senses. Wonderful, wonderful woman. And everything goes as well as you can expect. And then a guy asks me out. And I had never been asked out. And this guy works up enough courage to ask me out at university. And I'm sort of like, I don't know what I'm supposed to do right now, help. And I said to him, I don't know, but I'm willing to find out. And he, bless his heart, like bless him, said, I'm cool with that. And we dated a little bit. And as things got, I'll use the term more intimate, I realized that I had no physical attraction to this man. He was a sweet enough man, but I had no attraction to him. And luckily, we broke up on really good terms. We're still talking to this day. He's a wonderful guy. And then a friend of mine put the idea back in my head, well, maybe you like girls. And I went, maybe. But that meant I had to reconcile sin with, but what if I like girls? And this is why I say that the gender sexuality is fluid, because, I started thinking I was a lesbian because I didn't like guys. So obviously you like girls, right? Well, I ended up on the floor in a full-length prayer. And this is again where I say God has a sense of humor, because the answer I got from God was, you have the internet, go use it. And I spent the entire night up until the next dawn Googling affirming ministries and looking at the theology behind like the clobber passages in the Bible and why they don't work. And I was in tears. And I loved it. That was like this life-changing, no, this is not a sin, you are perfectly fine, stop it moment. So I progressed a little while further, found the church university, and this is the church where I heard the horrible, actual violent rhetoric. This was the church where I'm like, but this is someone like me. I didn't say that, but like I could not believe the hatred that came out of these people. And even if you believe that homosexuality is a sin, that like we were abominations to be destroyed. And I did not understand it. I still don't to this day. I still don't to this day. So I noped out of that church as soon as I could, and I had never been back to church since. Now, I got involved with the LGBTQ and only a little because it's accessible for folks, partnerships, or anything else of that nature. So there was a lot of that barriers to overcome, and it actually took me a tag along. I was not assumed to be a romantic or sexual being. I was assumed to be the person in the wheelchair. And I didn't know that asexual was actually a gender option until I basically found that through those groups. And it clicked. And it was like, oh my gosh, this actually makes sense to me. Because even as a teenager, I didn't get why sex sold. Again, when all the girls were like, oh my gosh, that boy's so cute, I didn't get it. And even in university, friends were like, that girl's so cute. I didn't get it. So much sense to me of needing a sanctuary as I'm supposed to be. If you look at the book of Genesis, we are all made in the book of in the image of the divine. Still cutting out? Okay, that's probably my internet. We are all made in the image of the divine. And the thing is, I think that that's often forgotten. We have people and lives in this society we don't value. I will point everybody to the Disability Day mourning, the disabled children who are killed by their caregivers, and it's considered a mercy kill, that the kids are in a better place. And I look at that and go, but that could be me. We do this. It's so easy for society to forget that we are all, every single last human being on the planet, says the planet, made in the image of the divine. And that is a lesson I want to end here with. That reminder that we are all made in the image of the divine, and we all have to do the work and the learning and the process to make sure that none of our divine siblings are left behind or left out, because there is no reason for that. Maybe there are things we have to change, things we have to do, but we can do that work. And it is so important because, as I said, no one should be on the steps of a church terrified to walk in the front door. And I'm going to end it there. I apologize for the internets. They are being a bit of a butts.
Well, I have to say, I'm really sorry that they cut out a bit.
Okay.
Like, your talk was so important to hear, and really, I had no idea the things
Sorry, the internets.
Yeah. So anyway.
I'm sorry, the internets are not cooperating.
Yeah, unfortunately. But thank you for that talk, and no questions came out, but at the same time, maybe some questions will come out later. But I have to just say thank you for that. That was really amazing. And I just think, I think, from myself and from my friends, I think it's very interesting hearing how queer people do end up coming back to church if they've had church in their young lives, or come to church without having had it previously. And it's usually a much more complicated story than I think for straight folks. So now,
definitely.
People that we all know and love as well, more people from our congregation that we love as well. Brenda and Jim Lean have been residents of Bloor West Village for 25 years. In that time, they have raised 2 daughters, several cats, and have been involved in many community groups, including Runnymede, obviously, as well as mums groups, public school pizza days, scouts, and book clubs, to name a few. Brenda is the owner-operator of her own garden design and maintenance business, employing a crew of 6 women yearly, with sales of $250,000 annually. Jim is a weekday full-time custodian of Runnymede United Church and has been instrumental in moving our Sunday morning services online, as well as the Sunday school. He is a dedicated gadget whisperer, and he's interested in all things tech. Their eldest daughter, who's soon to be 23, came out to her family as a trans female. She was assessed as male at birth, and she came out 3 years ago. It's taken the whole family on a journey of learning and becoming aware of how to support gender identity. At present, Ellen is happily married in a polyamorous relationship with her spouse and third partner, and is awaiting US documents that will allow her to move to San Francisco to be with them full time. Their younger daughter, Carly, is 21. She is a straight cisgendered student at Sheridan College in the cybersecurity degree program. And I personally feel she's going to be the most employable person that any of us know in the future with that degree. For the past 3 years, Brenda and Jim have been increasingly involved with Toronto PFLAG, a registered charity dedicated to supporting LGBTQ 2S+ families and individuals. They have participated in the Pride Parade, although not this year because of COVID. They've helped host family-oriented and fundraising events and worked with the charity's board on a number of special projects, all the while learning about the rainbow community and hearing their stories. They will now talk and share a little bit about that journey from the parents' point of view.
So I have a business background, so when somebody asks me to talk, I immediately go to PowerPoint, unlike Sarah Dawn, who did such a lovely ad hoc talk. So sorry about that, folks. I wanted to start off by saying this is one person's or one family's story. And if I've learned anything from being involved in PFLAG, every story is different. We also want to acknowledge that we have Ellie's permission to share some of her story as our journeys as her parents and her as our child are intertwined. And although it says parents here, when I started really thinking about it, the info really applies to everyone. From the perspective of how do we respond when someone reveals themselves to us in such a vulnerable way, who they authentically are.
Just for everyone's benefit,
Okay.
like, I think if we run a few minutes long, I think people, like, the talks that we're having are so interesting that I think people won't mind going a few minutes long if it takes you a little bit long.
So from a young age, we made a conscious decision that our kids would have access to both girl and boy toys, and they could choose to play with whatever they wanted. Jim and I thought we were very progressive for our times. As a child, Ellie loved trains. She loved playing with Lego and Duplo and Playmobil. And she would sometimes play dress up with her little sister and her friends, often choosing to dress up as a cat or another animal. In school, she was close friends with both girls and boys, and she was bullied throughout her time at Runnymede Public School, right from JK on through grade 8. Looking back at the pictures, she wore her hair fairly long in grade school, and that evolved into a rat tail. And so then when she started high school, we strongly suggested that she cut her hair short to fit in better. And at one point she grew a beard to try and maybe look or feel a bit more masculine. So that's Ellie through the years. And that last picture there is Ellie with her spouse, Lexi, beside her, and their partner, Chelsea. So I thought it would be helpful. This is a slide that Toronto PFLAG uses in their presentations in schools and to businesses. And it helps understand some of the terminology and where you can go in all of this. So the first arrow is biological sex. So that's what the doctor says, that when they look between a baby's legs, they say, congratulations, you have a boy or you have a girl. And if it's not obvious, then they say that the child is intersex. That's a whole other topic. We're not going to get into that at the moment. The second arrow is gender identity, and that's how your brain identifies. So you might be certain that you're female, like I'm certain that I am a female. You might be certain that you're male, like Jim is certain that he's a male, or you might feel like you're neither or both. So the last two feelings are known as being non-binary, gender fluid, or gender queer. And as Sarah Dawn was saying, terminology changes and is also fluid. So this might be out of date at this point. The third arrow is gender presentation. So how do we choose to present ourselves to other people? How do we dress? How do we wear our hair? And we feel best when our gender presentation tells the world who we are. So when people look at us, they understand us to be a woman or a man, or somewhere in between. The fourth arrow is gender perception, and that actually refers to what other people think when they look at us. Do they know right away what our gender identity is, or are they unsure? And then finally, the fifth arrow is probably something you're more familiar with, which is sexual orientation. Are you attracted to men? Are you attracted to women? And this is where heterosexual or being gay comes in. The middle is bisexual or pansexual, a term that means someone's attracted to all genders. So if you went down this slide and looked at me, I am all down the side that's female, woman, feminine, woman, and attracted to men. So I am about as boring as you can get, and I'm not at all rainbow. If you were to look at Ellie, she was born male, so she's born on the other side of the first arrow. Her gender identity is woman, which takes her all the way across to the other side of the arrows. then she presents kind of in between feminine and non-binary, because she's not too she doesn't care too much about looking super feminine. And I think gender perception is that's probably how the world sees her. And then her sexual orientation is she goes all the way back to the other side because she's attracted to women, or she's pansexual, somewhere in there. So she's kind of like all over the place, which I find very fascinating, and it's interesting to see how that all plays out in her life. So when Ellie was born, the doctor said, "Congratulations, you have a son," based on Ellie's genitalia. And then when she was 19, she told us that she feels like a woman and she would like to dress to reflect that and be treated as a woman. So that makes her transgender or trans female. So again, you don't, on the other hand, for myself, when I was born, the doctor said, "Congratulations, you have a girl." And as I grew up, I considered myself a girl, and that never changed. So I'm considered cisgender because my gender matches my genitalia. So again, you don't choose or become gay or transgender or non-binary or any of the other LGBTQ2S designations. It's the way you are when you're born. And we just really like to say that we're fiercely proud of Ellie's courage to explore and discover who she is and to share that with the world authentically. It's awe-inspiring to watch her. Just going to get my notes because this presentation doesn't actually have my most recent. No, I'm not going to get my notes. My most recent changes, so that's okay. We felt that we were avoiding gender policing when we were raising our kids, because we had all these different toys available to them, and we were not judging their interests. We were open to whatever they were interested in, and we were certainly open to our kids being gay. But when I look back from the perspective of how Ellie's life has played out, I realized that we did not really give that indication to our kids. I don't think we ever really had a conversation with them saying it's okay to be gay, or it wasn't an ongoing conversation like I see some parents have with their kids today. I don't think there were any books or TV shows at that time, or if there were, we certainly weren't aware of them, or even we weren't aware of the need to have them in our home to show that there were different options and that we were okay with that. So Ellie says she didn't really start questioning her identity until she was in high school, and she was playing online games, and she had to create a persona for herself, and she created a female avatar. So that was sort of part of the process for her, was creating that person as a female. So we feel like there weren't really any clues that Ellie was transgender. On the other hand, now looking back over her life, I do recall a time when she was about 5. We used to get boxes of hand-me-down clothes from friends of ours. We would send Ellie's clothes to their son, and they would send their daughter's clothes to Carly. And I remember Ellie saying one time, very disappointed, that no one ever sent her dresses to wear. And so we had a good laugh about it, and we let her try them on, and we took some pictures. I still have them. And but we had no notion that that might have been an indication of who she really was, or what was, what the possibilities were with that information. They're just in that era, and certainly for us, there wasn't the same knowledge that there is today. And I want to acknowledge what Sarah Dawn has said about that there continues to be a lack of understanding and acceptance that is widespread across Canada, including Toronto, and in particular among those who claim to be religious, that the religious community has done a lot of damage and done a lot of hurtful things to the LGBTQ2S plus community. And much like, we do the indigenous land acknowledgement, I think it's helpful to acknowledge that has been our history, and it's only very recent that we've realized that we were wrong and are trying to correct our ways and our perceptions. There's a disproportionately high percentage of homeless youth who are rainbow people, and I met someone through PFLAG who runs a place called Rex Pride up in Rexdale, and he takes it upon himself. He's created a charity, and he takes it upon himself to try and keep the kids who have been kicked out of their houses, out of their homes, to keep them safe while they're still trying to finish high school. And there's a lot of opportunity, I would say, for us to do some pretty useful and meaningful work in the LGBTQ 2S plus community, if we if we had the heart for it. I certainly have the heart for it, obviously. The experiences that I've had have made me wonder, what would it be like if our society had a ritual or a rite of passage where everyone comes out, rather than just assuming that everyone is cisgender and straight. If we all just came out when we realize who it is that we like and who it is that we are, we have some kind of ritual, and we share that. I've also spent time wondering what it'd be like if we didn't assign gender at birth, but rather waited for our children to tell us who they are. I've had some rather interesting conversations with friends my age who are now grandparents, trying to suggest this to them. And they consider me rather radical and I think completely crazy. But I think it's worth discussing because things do need to change. So back on to Ellie, I wanted to share a bit of her coming out story. While Jim had had some experience with transgender youth through scouting, I confess that I had been quite dismissive of those kids and their experiences, thinking that they were just doing this to get attention. I had a lot to learn. I really had a lot to learn. When Ellie and I had our conversation, I was completely focused on the laundry. I had no idea what was coming. Even though I was asking her if she realized that she'd just gone out and purchased girls' clothing, because I thought it was for her girlfriend, and I couldn't figure out why she was having me remove the tags and wash the clothing when it was supposed to be for her girlfriend. It's supposed to be a gift. And I was explaining to her that you don't wash clothes and don't take the tags off if it's going to be a gift. And she kept saying, "It's not a gift, Mom. You can take the tags off and you can wash it." And it took me a couple of times of going up and downstairs from the laundry, taking tags off, and then going, "This is weird, something's wrong here," and going up and talking to her till we got to the bottom of the matter. So I'm not a boy conversation is a very hard conversation to have for a parent. Thankfully, in spite of being totally panicked and frozen when Ellie said the clothes were for her, my recollection is that I said, "I love you no matter what. I don't really know what this means, but we'll figure it out together." And I hugged her. Well, in fact, I was the one who needed to do the figuring out. Ellie already knew who she was. And inside, although I was calm and, well, relatively calm, I am an emotional person. But I was, I think, on the outside, supportive and loving, because Ellie says she doesn't remember the conversation. So clearly I didn't traumatize her. Inside, though, I was really struggling. I worried that Ellie would be even more bullied and that no one would love her. I worried what our friends and our family would do and say. Would they still accept her, or would we have to walk away from them? I worried that people at church would judge us as bad parents, and we would have to turn our back on that community if they didn't accept her. And what about the parents whose children Ellie had taught in Sunday school? What were they going to tell their kids now that she was going to come to school in a dress? So those were all the things that were going through my mind very, very quickly. So when your kids go on a journey like this, they take you with them, or actually, that's not true. They start you on your own journey. That's what happens. So it took me a while to ask the right questions. Generally, they were prompted by what we were learning at Trans Youth Transfit Parents course at Central Toronto Youth Services. Sorry, Jim's prompting me here. We were horrified at that program to hear of the suicide rate among LGBTQ2S community and among transgender folks in particular. And we learned that by having the support and acceptance of parents, that it decreased that exponentially. So if we hadn't been on board before learning that, we definitely were once we knew that information. Ellie had said that she didn't mind if we still used her old name and pronouns. We learned that that was wrong, so we stopped doing that. We worked together to find her new name that she felt reflected who she is. And then gradually we got better at using the right pronouns and names, although we still slip up every now and then, to my chagrin. Immediately following Ellie's revelation in trying to process and figure out how best to parent the situation, because I didn't really know anybody who parented a transgender person, I shared the news privately with a very few discreet friends. Their reactions were varied, and looking back, not super helpful. They were not well informed or equipped to help me, really, and that's not their problem. That was just there was less information available, and I seemed to be the first person among my friend group who was going through this. So I started to do research. I have a research background, so I read everything I could get my hands on. I exhausted the public library. I did all sorts of research on the internet. And then we turned to the rainbow community. Jim and I signed up to take the course that I mentioned, Transfit course, which was exceptional. And there I met my first transgender adults. They were all proudly out and living useful lives. And some of them were actually in committed, loving relationships. And so that helped immensely. I could see a future for Ellie, and it wasn't as bleak as I thought. In fact, it looked pretty good. And so finally, I started to attend the monthly Toronto PFLAG support meetings at St. Olaf's. And I met more transgender people there. Some of the people that they call the elders, who some transgender women who have been transgender for a very long time and had had a very different journey than Ellie was having. And also more parents of transgender kids. And so I realized I was not alone. We were not alone. And that there were others who needed help, that because we had taken this course, we actually were a little bit further along in our understanding and our acceptance than people whose kids had just come out to them and who hadn't had this education. So I could see my way forward. And so that's kind of where we've been. Since then, we've been involved in PFLAG. And in fact, they've actually asked me to be on their board as of this year. So how do we get off of this now so I can see people? So that's the end of my talk. Yes. And I'm happy to say I stayed within time.
Thank you so much, Brenda. That was really amazing. I have to say, looking at those pictures of Ellie from her whole life, it's amazing how beautiful she is. And it's and you're right, like I knew her when she was a lot younger, and I wouldn't have said anything or thought anything, but you look back and she was just such a beautiful, I mean, it just makes so much sense now, right? You know, it's funny, right?
I had a moment where Jim and I were attending a talk by a woman who had written a book, and PFLAG had organized a book reading by her, and her partner, who is a transgender woman, got up and spoke and said she when there were gatherings, she always went and hung out with the women in the kitchen, even though she was a man at the time. And because she felt like this was her crowd, this was her people. And it made me think of all the times that Ellie would hang out in the church kitchen after church, washing dishes with Dorothy Dunbar and all of those ladies. And
Yeah.
that was Ellie. And I was like,
Yeah.
oh my gosh, there's another clue. Who knew? Yeah.
Yeah, and I just want to say too, like as someone that came out myself, there is, you know, I think parents can worry about how they handled it, but I do think there's a real gift that is given to people, or that we get, those of us that, you know, how you were saying, Brenda, we should all have a day where everyone has to say what they are and what sex they are. But because a lot of people don't, I think a lot of people just take it for granted. And I think having to actually think about that and kind of go against a norm, it actually is a gift, because it does give something to you in terms of your ability to choose. So I actually, for myself, I've really related to the story of the ugly duckling. And I feel like, you know, when I came out, I was with the swans, and I really loved that. So I think there's something, it's very difficult, and it's difficult in families, but it's also a really empowering, wonderful feeling to really figure out who you are and be able to tell the world about it. So, and thank you for helping your daughter do that. So if anybody wants to ask a question, yeah, Jim's wondering if we should just unmute, and if anybody wants to ask a question or how people are feeling. It's always hard to kind of ask questions after conversations like this, because they're so, they just give you so much to think about. But does anyone have a question?
Well, I just actually I'll jump in with a comment, if no one minds.
Not at all, it'd be great.
I will say, like, with the college coming out, I have, despite all the trouble, that was one place I didn't have trouble. So a bit of a humorous story is that when I attempted to come out to my father, the way I prefaced it, he then, oh my God, what? Well, I thought you were going to tell me you were pregnant. My father actually took it very well, for which I was very grateful. He'd originally thought, by how I was leading up, that I was going to tell him I was pregnant. So just a bit of fun parental humor there.
Yeah, you do find out what people really are scared about when you come out to. So it's now just after 8, and there is a question for Sarah Dawn. I'm wondering if you know, people can feel free to leave if they want, but if people want to stick around for a few more questions, I think it would be nice to have them. Jim, did you say that there's, so anyway, so that's just my way of saying feel free to leave whenever you want. And Sarah Dawn, are you willing to answer a few more questions? And Brenda?
Oh yeah, I got time.
Okay. So Jim, did you want to ask the question for Sarah Dawn?
So Sarah Dawn, have you been able to come to terms with your sexuality now?
Now that I have learned that asexuality is a thing, yes. But it was this sort of like, I didn't know this existed, which is why it was such a journey. And I have learned that there are also different types of asexuality. So some asexuals, the act of sex is actually repugnant. Others will do so with a partner, and there's no issue. Some asexuals also do not seek romance or a life partner, and some do. And as I learned more, I began to realize that yes, this actually makes sense to me. And so I have kind of come to terms with that. And it took a lot. It wasn't difficult in the actual processing. It was difficult in the, I didn't know this existed. I didn't know there are words and concepts to describe this. So yeah, now that I have learned, I have come to terms with it. It's still ongoing as to how it means in interacting with everybody else, because if you say you're asexual, people don't usually understand that. And I have the double effect there of disabled people are assumed to be asexual. We're not supposed to have, as I said, romance or relationships or have kids or get married. So, there's sort of that weird dichotomy there. But now that I have figured out that's what I am, like, it makes a whole lot of things make sense. And I'm glad that the queer community gave me the words for the thing that, looking back, makes a lot of sense. I don't know if that answers the question. I hope it does.
I think that does answer the question. And a question for Brenda.
Okay, there's a question for Brenda. Do you think there's anything Runnymede United Church could do to make Ellie more comfortable?
That's a very thoughtful question. When I listened to Jean's talk, the last talk that we had from the Indigenous gay two-spirited person, and he spoke about how a lot of churches put a sign out front that says all are welcome, but they haven't actually done anything inside the church or really to the outside of the church that shows that you've given any thought to what would actually make someone of that persuasion comfortable. That really resonated with me, and I actually took a walk through the church, and the only rainbow that we have in our church is about this big and is on the door to the youth group room. So I think a few more rainbows would help. I think there's a lot we could do to make it much more apparent that we accept Indigenous people, that we accept Black people, that we accept people of rainbow, all sorts of people on the outside of the building and on the inside of the building as well. So I think maybe some murals, like, how in schools that they have at the anywhere that there's a big wall, they've made it into an art project. We could have one that was a rainbow related, one that was Indigenous artwork related, one that was maybe a Black Lives Matters statement piece or something. And that would go a long way to helping people see that these are issues that we care about. And I think too, like, we have our native plant garden tucked away on the side of the building. And I think if we were to put something in the front of the building, maybe around the sign that had native plants in it, and that had markers with English names of plants and also native names of plants, and maybe some kind of flags or something. And I don't know, that would show from the outside that of the church that we are concerned about these matters and these people. Because right now I feel like the outside of the building and even in the inside of the building doesn't really reflect who we are. But Martha, that's the affirming committee. You guys are going to do all that.
That's right. It's just going to be like a snap and it'll happen. But I take your point. I think you've got to assume that, especially for the LGBTQ community, that I think at Sarah Dawn's point as well, is that I think we have to assume that community is going to err on the side of we're not welcoming. Like, if they don't know, they're not going to assume that we're welcoming. So we have to actually make a point of making it clear that we are welcoming, or they won't know. And so, yes, I think of some rainbow flags, and also the different kinds of rainbow flags, right? There's the transgender flag, and there's, anyway, so I agree. There's some signage that could help for sure.
Yeah.
Jen has a question.
Not a question, just a comment. First of all, I want to thank the speakers this evening. Your stories are beautifully told and heartfelt, and it is a privilege for us to hear them. One point I'd like to make is not only that increasing our welcome or our doors open, our hearts to people who are on the rainbow, make those people feel more welcome. It makes everybody feel more welcome. It's not just for those people that we're doing it, it's for everybody. And I think that's critically important for us to continue to be reminded and to think about. It's not just for them that we're doing it. It helps me. It helps everybody. We all gain. That's important.
I agree.
That's all I wanted to say. And thank you.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's like, it's the same with, it's all accessibility issues. When we make a place more accessible, emotionally, physically, it makes it more accessible for everyone, for sure, for sure. Well, I think if that's all the time, is there anything?
Martha, could I just say something? Thank you.
Absolutely.
I guess it was about a year and a half ago, Jim, that you and I, or a couple of years ago, that we talked very early on when Ellie had come out to you. And one of the things, I know something you've told me since, or Brenda told me, was that Ellie has her new passport, identifying her as who she is now. But at that time, I mentioned something to you, and I still think it's something we have to think about. For young people, not just young people, for transgender people who are members of a church, do we need to look at being baptized as the person that they are, and being confirmed into church membership as the person that they are? Because the baptism certificate doesn't say Ellie. I just wondered if that's another thing that we can do in the church, or something that we can look at, something that the committee can look at.
That's such an interesting idea. I have to tell you, I have a friend who's Jewish who transitioned from female to male, and we had a bar mitzvah for him. You know, and it seems sort of appropriate that in the Jewish tradition there was a ceremony for becoming a man, and we use it creatively. So I think it's a thought, actually. I think it's a good idea.
Yeah, I think I'll ask Ted. He'll be in the office tomorrow. So.
I suspect that the United Church of Canada has already considered that question.
I would think so too,
Yeah.
but I don't have that answer right now.
Yeah, me neither. Yeah.
We'll find out.
Another item for the list of the affirming committee.
Yeah.
I think too, we could, as I'm reflecting, we could use pronouns more. We could have them on our name tags. We could have them on when we sign off from our email. And it's not just that we do it at church, but that we do it in our lives. If we're truly supportive of this group of people, then we use them everywhere as a suggestion. I'm still learning how to do these things too.
Well, and I think a lot of people think, oh, why do cisgendered people, why do we have to put our pronouns down? But I think the idea is that if people are doing it, then it doesn't stick out when someone who's transgender does it. And I think that that's something that we all, as well, you're right, Brenda, that we all kind of have to learn how to be allies for that community, for sure.
Yeah, on that note, the idea of don't make someone ask for the thing, have it already in place. Just make this normal, that everybody uses pronouns, or that, you know, it shouldn't be, none of this should be something that must be asked for. I mean, obviously it's going to be because we don't know everything, but, you know, what we do know, it's Okay, we know there's a thing. We'll just do it so that you don't have to ask or get special dispensation or go through a hoop or get a special accommodation. It just is. It's just here and you can use it. Or it's just something we all do. And it takes away the stigma of having to ask and possibly even out yourself. You know, and that makes a huge difference. If it's just safe to, if it is safe to do the thing and you don't have to take the risk of someone saying no.
It's true.
So yeah.
Well, thanks everyone. We've gone about 15 minutes over, so I think we should stop now. But as I did say, I think this is really the beginning of a conversation. It's not in any way the end. And I think just the ideas that have come up in the last couple of minutes of conversation really show that there's a lot of room for us to have ideas going forward about how to make our church more welcoming. So thank you. And again, thank you to Brenda and Jim and Sarah Dawn. It's always so valuable to hear personal stories, especially from within our own congregation, because they're stories about people we love and we care about. And I always feel that if you want to make somebody accepting, have someone that they love be part of that group, and that's going to be an accepting person. So it makes us all be better people when we have you guys with us. So thank you.
I'm happy to babble at you all.
Thank you.
Okay, bye.
Bye.